What if I told you the German Navy didn't lose the Atlantic to courage or firepower, but to a silent copper device no bigger than a clenched fist? For years, U-boats ruled the ocean, unseen, unstoppable. Thousands of German sailors believed they were ghosts beneath the waves. Until one winter morning in 1943, the hunters suddenly became the hunted. In a frozen Berlin lab, German engineers found something inside the wreckage of a British bomber, a strange copper cylinder that seemed too small to matter. But it pulsed with a rhythm no one could explain. Across the Atlantic, submarines began disappearing without a trace. Entire wolfpacks went silent, not sunk in battle, but ambushed in total darkness, as if the enemy could see through the sea itself. When the German admiral finally connected the dots between the wreckage in Berlin and the losses at sea, he realized it wasn't strategy that failed Germany. It was imagination. But before that moment of realization, a single spark inside that copper heart would change the fate of the war and expose the secret weapon that made the oceans transparent. The hum of generators filled the Telefunken lab, low, steady, almost human. On that frozen February morning in 1943, German engineers gathered around what looked like a piece of scrap copper pulled from a wrecked British bomber. None of them knew they were holding the weapon that would end their navy's dominance. Hans Runger leaned closer, his breath fogging in the cold air. The copper cylinder gleamed faintly under the lamp. Too small to be radar, too perfect to be handmade. What if, he whispered, this isn't debris, but something we were never meant to see? The oscilloscope flickered to life. A pulse appeared, clean, rhythmic, impossibly fast. The room went still. Admiral Fuchs broke the silence. If that signal is what I think it is, he stopped, eyes fixed on the screen. Then the Allies can see through darkness. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. The hum of the device filled the room like a heartbeat. They called it a magnetron, a word that to most meant nothing. But to Runger it meant disaster. The frequency counter spiked, 3.3 gigahertz. 40 kilowatts of power, said physicist Otto Hakenberg. It's like discovering the enemy has artillery while we still fight with rifles. Every test deepened the horror. The Metox receivers Germany relied on could only hear meter waves, ancient, clumsy frequencies. The British magnetron screamed in the centimeter range, 9 times faster beyond all German detection. At that same hour, hundreds of kilometers away, another U-boat vanished in the Atlantic. The connection wasn't obvious, not yet, but Runger felt it in his gut. Something invisible was turning the tide of war. For 2 relentless weeks, they rebuilt the wrecked radar system piece by piece. Power circuits, rotating scanners, the eerie green screen that painted coastlines in light. When the display finally came alive, the men froze. There it was, the land itself glowing in ghostly precision, a perfect map traced in darkness. Outside, Berlin still burned from Allied raids on Hamburg and Cologne. Inside, the glow of that radar felt like a prophecy. The same technology guiding British bombers through smoke and cloud was now pulsing inside their lab. Runger stared at the light. He didn't see coastline or rivers anymore. He saw submarines, surfacing in confidence, blind to the eyes watching them from above. The truth hit him like cold iron. The war beneath the waves was no longer fought in silence. It was being fought in wavelengths. Each test stripped away another illusion of superiority. Runger muttered. The hum deepened, vibrating through the metal benches. Fuchs turned to him slowly. You understand what this means, Hans? Runger nodded, voice barely audible. Yes, sir. The ocean isn't ours anymore. And as the magnetron's pulse echoed through the lab, far across the Atlantic, another signal went silent. A submarine. Gone. The North Atlantic was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard. Every night another U-boat disappeared beneath black waves without a trace. The men inside never saw the planes that killed them, only the flash of light before the pressure crushed everything. In Wilhelmshaven, Admiral Karl Dönitz stood over the latest report. Convoy HX-229, lost contact. U-608 vanished mid-transmission. He stared at the paper until the ink blurred. They're not fighting us, he thought. They're hunting us. When the Telefunken report reached his desk, Dönitz read it twice in silence. A British radar, centimetric wavelength, undetectable to every German receiver. He set the page down slowly. They can see us, he murmured, even in the dark. Across the Atlantic, depth charges thundered through the sea. Crews clung to bulkheads as light bulbs shattered overhead. One survivor later said, "It felt like the ocean itself had betrayed us." At Telefunken, Runger's team worked through endless nights, measuring frequencies while commanders counted bodies. Every new discovery came with another telegram from the front. Boat lost, crew missing. We were fighting the sea, Dönitz said later, but the enemy had learned to fight the invisible. He ordered emergency fixes. New detectors, silent radios, smaller patrol zones, but none of it mattered. The Allies no longer searched, they knew. From Iceland to Gibraltar, the skies were alive with radar. The hunters had become the hunted. Night after night, U-boats surfaced to breathe and died within minutes. Searchlights split the fog. Engines screamed overhead. Then came the concussion, the metallic scream of hulls collapsing under pressure. By April 1943, entire wolfpacks had vanished. Situation reports grew shorter, colder, no further contact. Early in May, codebreakers intercepted a single dying transmission, 11 seconds of static. It marked the beginning of Black May, 41 boats lost in 31 days. Dönitz walked the corridors of his headquarters like a man moving through fog. Officers saluted him without meeting his eyes. On the great Atlantic map, the black pins of active boats turned red, one by one. Back in Berlin, Runger reviewed new data from the magnetron tests. The frequencies matched the coordinates of the lost boats perfectly. He closed the notebook. "The numbers aren't equations anymore," he whispered. "They're men." That night, a storm rolled over Berlin. Lightning flashed through shattered windows of the Telefunken lab. Runger stood before the humming magnetron, its steady pulse cutting through the thunder. It wasn't just a machine anymore, it was the sound of defeat. At dawn, Dönitz addressed his staff. "Our men fight bravely," he said, "but they fight blind. We face an enemy who sees through the dark." No one spoke. Only the ticking of a wall clock answered him. He dismissed the meeting and turned toward the Atlantic map. Lines that once symbolized control now looked like veins of a dying giant. He placed his hand on the cold table and whispered, "The sea no longer hides us." Outside, thunder faded toward the Baltic. Inside, only one sound remained, the faint, unbroken hum of the magnetron. By late May 1943, the North Atlantic was silent. The echoes of war that once shook the waves had faded into stillness. Convoys now crossed freely, their destroyers sweeping the seas with radar-guided certainty. The hunters had vanished. The hunted had survived. In Flensburg, Admiral Karl Dönitz read the final loss report, 41 U-boats in 1 month. Thousands of men gone without a trace. He didn't speak, didn't move. He simply folded the paper and stared at the map before him, the ocean that had once been his empire. Around him, officers worked in silence. The pride of the Kriegsmarine had become a list of names carved into water. For the first time, Dönitz ordered a retreat. To his men, the message was wrapped in hope. We will return stronger. But inside, he knew. Strength was no longer built from steel or courage. It was built from circuits, wavelengths, and invisible forces Germany never understood. They had lost the war they couldn't even see. At Telefunken, Runger and his weary engineers completed their final report. It ended with a handwritten note that said, "The enemy has won the war of sight." Outside, Berlin burned again. Sirens wailed as Allied bombers, guided by the same magnetron, drew glowing green maps across the sky. In the flickering light, Runger sat alone, staring at the copper cylinder under glass. It looked harmless now, silent, ordinary. But he knew that inside that metal heart slept the future. Somewhere above the clouds, Allied crews watched their radar screens pulse. Tiny dots that meant bridges, factories, and lives. The same device that stripped the Atlantic bare was now turning Germany's own sky transparent. In the command bunker, Dönitz traced his fingers over the Atlantic routes one last time. "The sea no longer hides us," he whispered. "It never will again." When the war ended 2 years later, British scientists entered the ruins of Telefunken. They found notebooks, diagrams, photographs, and in a locked drawer, Runger's final entry. "We built fortresses of steel. They built light. The magnetron that had destroyed Germany's naval power became the foundation for peace. Radar evolved into navigation, medicine, and communication. The same frequencies that once hunted submarines now guided planes, forecast storms, and, decades later, hummed quietly inside microwave ovens. For Germany, the defeat was more than military. It was philosophical. They had mastered every weapon of war except imagination. Years later, Dönitz wrote his last reflection. We were not defeated by the enemy's courage, but by his imagination. That line became the unspoken epitaph of the U-boat fleet. Today, those submarines still lie beneath the Atlantic, rusted tombs resting in eternal silence. Currents whisper through their broken hulls, carrying fragments of uniforms and memories long erased. Above them, merchant ships pass guided by descendants of the same radar that once doomed them. And somewhere, deep below, in the darkness where sound itself fades, one hum remains. The same hum that echoed through the Telefunken lab that winter. The steady, relentless hum of the magnetron,